Welcome to Spiritual Psychology. My name's Renee McKenna, and I bring my 30-plus years as a recovering addict and ex-crazy person turned therapist and shamanic healer to bring you snackable teachings on spirituality, psychology, and all things personal growth. And today I want to talk about working with the dead. We live in a culture that has a very poor and immature relationship with death. Many people in modern Western culture have never been with a dead body outside of perhaps a wake or a funeral. And it wasn't all that long ago that most people died at home, and the family cleaned and cared for the body of the deceased, and wakes were held in the living room. The majority of people find death scary, as we can see from our obsession with murder and crime shows, horror movies. Death is frequently held as something violent, bloody, or grotesque, and it's held as terrifying, tragic. And unless you live to be 100 years old, death is often seen as unfair. Personally, I find this incredibly unwise and even ridiculous, because the only thing we all have in common after birth is death. And we can deny it, we can avoid it, we can be terrified of it. But my experience is denial, fear, and avoidance are not great coping skills. And I believe that facing death, integrating the incredible lessons it has to teach us, and embracing the truth of the impermanence of all things, including ourselves and everyone we care for, can really call us to live more deeply, more presently, and more intentionally in our life today. I work with the dead a lot. And on a spiritual level, one of my primary teachers is the angel of death, one of the most compassionate and loving energies that I have had the privilege to encounter. And many people have a natural ability or awareness of the dead or disembodied spirits, what's traditionally been called ghosts. And early in my life, before I got on a path of spiritual practice, that idea freaked me out, not much differently than it freaks other people out. But I have a completely different understanding today, and there are practices available that allow us to actually be helpful to the dead that need help, and to gather resources, support, and guidance from the dead that's available to help us. So the dead that are available to help us are our ancestors, usually. Working with ancestors is probably the most ancient way of accessing spirit. Ancestor worship and honoring the dead is still actively pursued in one form or another in most cultures around the world. And although we can certainly receive help and guidance from dead that are not relatives, ancestral work is easily accessible to most people. And it's a different way of knowing and looking at our tribe. And we're all tribal. Our tribe is the people from which we come. It's all the relatives who have gone before us and the communities that we feel most nurtured by. Civilization as we know it started about 500 generations ago, and it's possible to have around 100 ancestors in each generation. And however we do the math, there are literally thousands of ancestors in our tribe. Ancestor work can be very powerful and grounding, but it can also be painful and challenging. Most people have issues with their immediate family, a difficult sibling, alcoholic father, controlling grandmother, maybe a loving uncle who may have died too young. And these dynamics exist in all cultures. And for adoptees, African Americans with slave ancestry, and those estranged from their immediate family, they might feel triggered by this topic. But it's my experience that working with ancestors can be particularly healing for those who have familial and ancestral disconnection. It's also my experience that working with ancestors extends in both directions. I believe that our personal growth process moves the evolution of our entire species forward. And I also believe that it's possible to send our own healing back through our lineage to benefit the ancestral spirits as well. In spiritual psychology, all time is present time. And from that perspective, the past is always available to us in the present. Now, not all of our ancestors are available to us, and there's many different ways to hold ancestral work. And some experience that those who have crossed over can be available less in their individual personalities than in the principles and intentions that they hold for us. Space and time are not conditions in which we live, they are modes in which we think. Our conscious mind conceptualizes time as a linear system consisting of past, present, and future. However, time is purely a mental construct. In reality and in the psyche, there is only the ever-present now. So working directly with ancestors for spiritual support can be very nourishing and connecting. However, the level of wisdom, insight, and knowledge available through these family connections can be really limited by the development of the ancestors themselves. We cannot transmit something we don't have. Working with the dead can be an incredibly supportive and helpful practice, but one must be aware that merely leaving the body does not make one enlightened. Just as when we were living, our relatives may have their own agendas. Even though they may have our highest good in mind, they may not have progressed enough in their own spiritual development to provide the guidance we seek. Which is why in my own practice, connecting with guides and teachers of even higher consciousness is imperative. And I'll share an example from my book, Allies and Demons, Working with Spirit for Power and Healing, in the chapter on ancestors and angels. So I had this client, Gabe. He was a super good-looking, stylish young guy. And he came to me feeling emotionally challenged in his romantic relationship. He loved his girlfriend, but he felt almost physically blocked from committing to a monogamous relationship with her. And when we went into the blocked feeling in his body and came upon Gabe as a 7-year-old boy at perhaps the most traumatic experience a child could have. Gabe had come home from school and opened the door to his house to find his mother murdered on the floor in front of him. He had no visceral memory of this experience, but had been told that this is what happened. And his first memory of the scene was sitting on the sidewalk with the police asking him questions. And we went deeper into the feeling in his body where he felt blocked, and it became clear that the blocking energy came to him the moment he opened the door that day. And through inner journey work, we discovered that the energy blocking him emotionally was the spirit of his dead mother, both wanting to protect him from the tragedy and also in her own death trauma at leaving her only son. Although her emotional intention and connection with him was completely understandable on a spiritual level, it had outlived its purpose and now blocked him from being able to bond in a healthy way with an adult woman. Gabe seemed comforted by this realization, and he left my office that day, and I never saw him again. As understandable as this protective relationship was, the dynamic was unhealthy for both Gabe and the spirit of his mother. It kept them both stuck. If Gabe had returned to work with me, we would have done some work with the spirit of his mother as well. When we drop into intuitive or transpersonal space, it is incredible and amazing the information and connections that are available to us. And ultimately, my intention would have been to do a work called psychopomp. The term psychopomp actually comes from Greek mythology, and psychopomp work is to guide the souls to the place of the dead. I'm going to tell you I remain very open about what happens after people die. I just know that this is my experience. Again, there's tremendous mystery around it. And psychopomp work is some of the most sacred, profound, and healing work that we can do. In fact, well-done funerals are psychopomp. In Catholicism, we call the angels and the saints, Jesus and Mary, God, we call the whole tribe to escort the soul of the dead to the next place. In fact, I have some serious questions about the lack of religious funerals that happen nowadays, and if that has an impact on the souls who have passed, to not have that intentional escorting. Now, not everyone needs it. When my friend Rose's mother died, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, her final words were, "Oh, it's beautiful." And then she died. She didn't need any help. Big Rose, as I like to call her, died as well as she lived. But it's okay to need help, and most of us do. I'm not very familiar with the death practices of other cultures, mostly Catholicism, and the Hail Mary, full of grace. Pray for us now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Mary is my own personal death guide, and I will say that prayer at the hour of my death, because the energy of Mary is a psychopomp. Psychopomp work is a fairly advanced practice, but anyone who is interested can learn it. And it's about connecting with those higher level resonances, which we might experience as guides and teachers, and grounding them in ordinary reality so that they can do that work of escorting the souls. And for me, Mary and the angel of death are essential parts of the team in my own practice. My first visceral experience of the dead was the sister of this guy that I was dating. And she had been killed in a car accident 10 years before. They had been very close. And when things got more serious with us, one day I was thinking about her and I felt her almost enter my body. I burst into tears and was just kind of blasted open. And I really felt her. She was a very enthusiastic, athletic, and well-loved young woman. And there were no words that went with that experience. Just a feeling that she was happy that I was with her brother. I've had the opportunity to do psychopomp work with pets and to track the souls of the dead on their own journey until they become out of my awareness. That's what happened with both my parents. I've never had a really felt experience of them since their death, but I didn't have a lot of felt experience with them that was connected in life. So it's not very surprising. In Buddhism, it's believed that after one dies, there's a period of, I believe, 40 days that we spend in what they call the bardo. It's the in-between place before we reincarnate. Done some really intense death and dying work, practicing dying and moving through the bardo myself. That's why I know. For me, Mary is my guide, because at the moment of our death, if we are open and connected, some believe we can jump over the bardo experience and maybe not have to repeat some of the difficulties that might catch us and pull us back. Our own unresolved emotional issues and ignorance, fear, the work it's a good idea to do while we have a body, so we don't have to do it over again next time. Now again, I'm unattached. I have no solid idea of what happens. I do find it fascinating what different traditions believe. In my own personal experience or conception, how it reveals itself to me is that there's a doorway to the next place. And for many different reasons, perhaps the death was unexpected, was seriously resisted, the dead may have attachments still to the living, or feel responsible to try to still care for them. And often psychopomp work, working with the dead or aspects of themselves that haven't been able to cross over, involves doing some healing work with them so that they can come to peace, accept that it's time to go to the next place and exit. And when they're brought to that doorway, it's a doorway filled with light and love. And generally there's a lot of other spiritual beings waiting on the other side. Sometimes they even come through and help escort the souls to the next place. And so I have come to be unafraid of the disembodied dead because they're lost. They don't belong here anymore, and it's time for them to go home. And it seems that those who are perhaps more highly evolved are able to move between the worlds, as I refer to in ancestor work, to be available as guides, teachers, sources of love, empowerment, and compassion. For many of my clients, the first teacher in human form they connect with is a loving relative. So there's a great mystery to death, what happens after, and our own relationship to it. But I implore you to bring it into your conscious awareness. Death is one of our greatest teachers in how to live. Thank you so much for listening. If you like this podcast, please consider leaving a review or subscribing. If you want to learn about my mentorship program or find out how spiritual psychology might benefit you, shoot me an email, info@reneemckenna.com. And check me out on Instagram, @ReneeLaValleyMcKenna. You can get a free download of the first chapters of my book that I mentioned earlier. There's a link in the show notes. And blessings on your path until we meet again. This is Renee LaValley McKenna for Spiritual Psychology.